Anderson, what a move! Tim Duncan from three-point line!
You're only half happy or?
Still to be happy about.
You're up 2-0.
Job's not finished.
Brings the crowd to its feet with a big smile. And the Lakers are the 2000 NBA champions.
NBA Finals MVPs are a rather powerful tool to have on one's resume. It says that in the most important series of the season, you were the most important player. And in some cases, it becomes a statement for a guy that many thought should have been the regular season MVP. The 2000 Finals MVPs are a different story and a bit more clear-cut than the actual team rankings we visited last time. Here, we're just looking at one individual over the course of one series, which is much less troublesome. This time to rank, we'll be taking into consideration their final stats, their opponents and/or defenders, how many games the series took and how heavily that was impacted by the player, what kind of help they had on their own team, and if there was a legitimate argument that somebody else could have won the award over them. Also, if there were any historical games or moments throughout the series from said player, that helps. At number 10, one of the admittedly least memorable Finals MVPs of that decade, Paul Pierce in 2008. Full disclosure, I am a Celtics fan myself, so this is not just bandwagon Paul Pierce slander. No, it actually just wasn't anything super special as compared to some of these performances we'll get into. Really, how many times have you heard somebody reminisce on Paul Pierce's 2008 Finals series? To start off, he was playing on a super team that had been fully expected to breeze to a title much of that season. Sure, they were playing a great Lakers team with the freshly minted duo of Kobe and Gasol, but he was doing so as part of a prime big three on a deep roster that would have been lauded as complete failures for coming up short. This would not have been such a big point if he'd come out with some GOAT-like performance totally outshining his other two stars, but at 21 points a game on 43% shooting, there's been hindsight arguments that Ray Allen possibly deserved it, putting up similar numbers on far more efficiency. That really becomes a problem when you put their games next to each other and see that Paul Pierce had a 6-point outing in a loss that nobody seems to remember. And to add to it, Ray Allen was the player of the closeout game. I, however, still maintain that Pierce deserved it. Not only was he hitting shots at very important moments throughout the series, he was also good defensively, often forcing Kobe Bryant into extremely tough shots that contributed to Boston's win. So there's a solid argument for Allen, sure, but Pierce was more important to that win than people like to remember. Looking at some signature moments, his lasting memory has become somewhat of an embarrassment over the years. Those of us watching at the time thought the series may have been over as he crumbled to the ground, needing to be carried off to the locker room. Yet him returning to hit a spirit-lifting three has been all but forgotten through the years as we learned the true nature of that interesting situation. The series ended in 6 games, with one of the more surprising blowouts in a closeout situation, but the series win was a lot more about the Celtics as a whole than Pierce himself. Somewhat similarly, coming in at 9, the only Finals MVP on this list that is not a lock-in for the Hall of Fame, Chauncey Billups. Obviously, statistical brilliance was never that much of a staple of the 04 Pistons, so it's no surprise that Billups actually didn't even score the most points for his team that series, that honor going to Rip Hamilton, who had very similar numbers. However, Billups was far more efficient and still the most important player, getting to the free throw line frequently and absolutely blitzing the Lakers from mid-range. It was interesting because for a good portion of this matchup, the Lakers chose to go under Billups' screens, practically handing a player named Mr. Big Shot wide open looks. But there were also times where Payton would go over them, allowing Chauncey to get into the lane for layups or fouls, given that the Lakers' big men did not necessarily have the foot speed to cover the action properly. The Pistons shockingly closed out Kobe and Shaq's Lakers in 5 games, but there were also 5 Piston players that averaged double digits in points over that stretch. Billups enjoyed the honors, but Detroit's win will always go down for their team defense more than anything, where, for example, in one game, they held Los Angeles to just 68 points. Just for reference, which probably is not needed, there was a time where Kobe and Shaq could combine for that on any given night. But yes, Chauncey was the key to a lot of their offense, and being able to shine and be the leading factor in beating a team they were huge underdogs to is what would separate he and Pierce for me. Coming in at 8, Tim Duncan's 2005 trophy, which ranks many levels below his performance just a couple of years earlier. At 20 points and 14 rebounds a game, that's saying a lot, but he did so on just 41% shooting against Detroit's staunch defense, as the Spurs narrowly edged this one out in 7. Amongst what people remember in that series are Robert Horry's game-winning shot to break the 2-2 tie, and the fact that Manu Ginobili may have been an acceptable replacement for the award. At 19, 6, and 4 on nearly 50% shooting, he could have very possibly made it so that each of the Spurs' big three walked away with the Finals MVP that decade. Still, Duncan's defense and Game 7 performance is likely what gave him the edge. even though Ginobili was nearly right there with him during the closeout. In any case, this was much more of a team-oriented takedown of the defending champions, unlike the other two Spurs titles of that decade, where you can very clearly point to one guy as the culprit. So this one sits at the back half of the list. But being the Finals MVP of the only series on this list that was against a defending champion, that probably weighs heavily into how this gets to number 8. And actually, at number 7, a teammate. Tony Parker's Finals MVP gets almost the same treatment, but more so because of what comes in front of it being just that great. I did an NBA 2000s episode on Tony Parker's impact on the 07 Finals if you've never seen it, and if you choose to, you'll quickly come away with the knowledge that Parker was the best player in the series by far. Everything the Spurs did on offense there began with the fact that there was not one Cavaliers body capable of staying in front of them. Given that fact, throughout this entire series, he penetrated, caused Cleveland's defense to rotate, allowing the Spurs to swing the ball, or he just flat out scored, which is what ended up being his greatest attribute. By the time it was said and done, Tony Parker, a point guard, averaged 25 points on 57% from the field. He also averaged 57 from 3, but that was with him only having taken 7 threes throughout the series. However, that is a product of him getting whatever shot he wanted when he wanted. San Antonio walked away with a clean sweep of an inferior Cavs team, and Parker became the only other Spurs player to ever win Finals MVP over Duncan. In his prime anyways. If this same performance was against a more capable team and or defenders, I think it'd go even higher. But at 6, it's hard to overlook Kobe's first title and Finals MVP without Shaq in 09. The Mamba was on a mission, and the Orlando Magic felt the full wrath of that. Sure, you have his 32 a game on 52% true shooting, but his passing was an underrated part of that series as he averaged nearly 7.5 assists to completely dismantle the Magic's defense. Speaking of dismantling, it didn't matter which defender they threw at him, mainly because he was hitting his regularly scheduled tough and unguardable jumpers at will. He also took full advantage of the fact that Orlando's defense was far more porous than what he'd seen a year earlier in Boston, so when he didn't just have to flat out shoot over somebody, he was getting where he wanted. The Magic were still a good team despite being the replacement for an injured Celtics squad, and the gentleman's sweep doesn't fully speak for how close some of the games were. But Kobe had a lot to do with why they wound up edging out the games that they did. He ranks just outside of the impenetrable top 5 Finals MVPs as performances get downright stupid at this point. That begins with Shaq's 2002 performance to cap off the Lakers' three-peat. 36 points, 12 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 blocks, and 60% from the field. An absolute unit. Oh yeah, he also shot 68 free throws, and all things considered, making 45 of them wasn't that bad. The Lakers sweep the Nets, and there's just not a ton to say here as it just about speaks for itself. As for why a performance like this ranks at the midpoint of the list, well, he's got 2 others that rank higher than this first of all, like his 2001 performance at number 4. This time he's down to 33 points, but still adds 16 rebounds, 5 assists, and 3 blocks against the Defensive Player of the Year. And that's not just for shock value, he very visibly folded Dikembe Mutombo. It looked painful. He also did this playing 45 minutes a game, so he was just on the court the entire time and dominating any defender, including the best one the league could throw at him. This one finishes in 5 after an all-timer by Allen Iverson, but there once again isn't even a conversation to be had about why this series went the way that it did. We might not ever see numbers or dominance in a series like that again, regardless of the increase in offense. But it may come as a shock that I'd put Tim Duncan's 2003 performance above both of these at the 3rd spot. True, we're never going to see numbers quite as dominant given that nobody's putting up 36 points with the rest of those stats, but Timmy's outing against the Nets here is criminally underrated. He posted 24, 17, 5, a steal, and 5 blocks a game. On 50% shooting, by the way. You seriously cannot overstate his impact on a series that went 6 games and was competitive, so it wasn't like the Spurs just expectedly walked to this title. In the closeout game, Duncan put up 21 points, 20 rebounds, 10 assists, and 8 blocks. This is a big man that nearly nabbed a quadruple-double in a game they could have easily lost. This was many years before big men were all-around stat sheet stuffers. San Antonio needed every last bit of dominant performance they could squeeze out of Duncan to win this series, where the Spurs were at their weakest title team of the decade, and they got it. He completely controlled just about every facet of the game, consistently rebounding over multiple players, hitting tough shots, altering many more shots than he blocked. He did everything. Just as a cherry on top, Duncan played 44 minutes a game that series, and Tony Parker was the only other Spurs player to even reach 30. You could probably argue this and the next 2 as the best Finals performances of the decade, but I have my reasons for keeping it here. For instance, at 2, it's also hard to rank D Wade's performance any lower, as it's quite possibly the most important one-man performance of the decade. The Heat literally could only go as far as Wade could take them here, and he dished out the best performance of his career at only his 3rd season in the league to defeat a 60-win Mavs team. It took him 35 points, 8 rebounds, 3 steals, and a block per game to get this done. Yet, there's always the question mark of him shooting nearly 100 free throws. There's questionable calls in every series to ever happen, but watching the footage, it'd be hard to question the number of these needed to to prove that there was some giant conspiracy. In reality, as Shaq told him he needed to do, he took over as the lightning quick slashing guard that he was. With defenders unable to stop him without fouling, Wade dug the Heat out of an 0-2 hole to win 4 straight, which is possibly the most impressive feat on this list. So if you would argue Wade or Duncan as the best finals MVP of the 2000s, I think it'd be justified. But of course, nearly by default, Shaq's 2000 performance takes the one spot in my mind. 2000 Shaq was likely the most dominant force we'll ever see, and that did not change when he put up 38 points, 17 rebounds, and 3 blocks on 61% shooting this series. O'Neal lists Rick Smits as one of the players that gave him the most fits, but with 3 40-point outings in a total of 6 games, this one just gets difficult to argue with. Of course, 6 games is the same amount of time it took Wade and Duncan right before this, so it was less of a cakewalk than his other 2 finals MVPs. Being dominant is one thing, but your squad also needing the dominance? Well, the Lakers absolutely did, as Kobe was deliberately injured, which Jalen Rose admittedly thought would make the series winnable. So, considering every factor, 2000 Shaq might have the best combination of elements being used to rank here. Competitive series, definitely not his best Lakers team, multiple historic finals performances, the overall stats, his direct impact on winning this series. I think 2000 Shaq checks just about every box. But with the other 2, I believe it's debatable. So let me know what you think in the comment section. Where would you rank these, and who do you think had the best finals MVP performance? Also be sure to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. As per the stats, most people who watch my videos are not subs, so if you'd like to keep up, hit the sub button and the bell next to my name if you want notifications every time a video drops, or else you aren't going to get notifications. Thanks YouTube. Also, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.